To the caravan. During the pre-dawn stillness, Varmous marshaled his caravan, ordering wagons and carriages, guiding passengers to their allotted places, quieting complaints with mild comments and an ingenuous gaze. He seemed to be everywhere, at once, a massive figure in black boots, a peasant's blouse and baggy pantaloons, his blonde curls confined under a flat, wide-brimmed hat. Occasionally he brought one of his passengers over to Cugel, saying, "Another person for the premier class." One by one these passengers accumulated until there were 6, including 2 women, Ermalde and Nicephor, both of middle years, or apparently so, since Nicephor shrouded herself from head to toe in a gown of rusty brown satin and wore a clump hat with a heavy veil. Where Nicephor was dry and taciturn, and seemed to creak as she walked, Ermalde was plump and voluble, with large moist features and 1,000 copper-colored ringlets. In addition to Nicephor and Ermalde, 4 men had decided to enjoy the privileges of the premier class, a varied group ranging from golf Robbie, an ecclesiarch and pantologist, through Clissom and Peruquil to Ivanello, a handsome young man who wore his rich garments with enviable flair, and whose manner ranged that somewhat limited gamut between easy condescension and amused disdain. Last to join the group was Clissom, a portly gentleman of good stature and the ineffable airs of a trained aesthete. Cugel acknowledged the introduction, then took Varmous aside. "We now have assigned 6 passengers to the premier category," said Cugel. "Cabins 1, 2, 3, and 4 are those designated for passenger use. We can also take over that double cabin formerly shared by the cook and the steward, which means that our own cook and steward must go to the forecastle. I, as captain of the vessel, will naturally use the after cabin. In short, we are now booked to capacity." Varmous scratched his cheek and showed Cugel a face of bovine incomprehension. "Surely not yet. The vessel is larger than 3 carriages together." "Possibly true, but the cargo hold claims much of the space." Varmous gave a dubious grunt. "We must manage better." "I see no flaws in the existing situation," said Cugel. "If you yourself wish to ride aboard, you can arrange a berth in the forepeak." Varmous shook his head. "That is not the problem. We must make room for more passengers. Indeed, I intended the after cabin, not for the use of either you or me after all. We are veterans of the trail, and demand no languid comforts." Cugel held up his hand. "Not so. It is because I have known hardship that I now so greatly enjoy comfort. The Avventura is full. We can offer no further premier accommodation." Varmous showed a streak of mulish obstinacy. "In the first place, I cannot spare a cook and a steward for the delectation of 6 passengers and yourself. I counted upon you to fulfill this duty." "What?" cried Cugel. "Review, if you will, the terms of our compact. I am captain and no more." Varmous heaved a sigh. "Further, I have already sold 4 other premiers. Aha, here they are now. Dr. Lelanki and his party." Turning about, Cugel observed a tall gentleman, somewhat sallow and saturnine of countenance, with dense black hair, quizzically arched black eyebrows, and a pointed black beard. Varmous performed the introductions. "Cugel, here is Dr. Lelanki, a savant of remark and renown." "Tush," said Lelanki, "you are positively effusive." Behind, walking in a row with long, slow steps and arms hanging straight down to narrow hips, like mechanical dolls, or persons sleepwalking, came 3 maidens even paler than Dr. Lelanki, with short hair loose and intensely black. Cugel looked from one to the other. They were much alike, if not identical, with the same large gray eyes, high cheekbones, and flat cheeks slanting down to small pointed chins. White trousers fitted snugly to their legs and hips, which were only just perceptibly feminine. Soft pale green jackets were belted to their waists. They halted behind Dr. Lelanki and stood looking toward the river, neither speaking nor displaying interest in the folk around them. Fascinating creatures, thought Cugel. Dr. Lelanki spoke to Varmous. "These are the component members of my little tableau, mimes, if you will. They are Sush, Skazja, and Rolais, though which name applies to which I do not know, and they do not seem to care. I look upon them as my wards. They are shy and sensitive, and will be happy in the privacy of the large cabin you have mentioned." Cugel instantly stepped forward. "One moment. The after cabin aboard the Avventura is occupied by the captain, which is to say myself. There is accommodation for 6 in the premier category. 10 persons are present. Varmous, you must repair your mistake and at once." Varmous rubbed his chin and looked up into the sky. "The day is well underway and we must arrive at Firkel's fountain before dark. I suppose we had better inspect the premier categories and see what can be done." The group walked to the grove of cypress trees which concealed the Avventura. Along the way, Varmous spoke persuasively to Cugel. "In a business such as ours, one must occasionally make a small sacrifice for the general advantage." Hence Cugel spoke with emphasis, "No more wheedling, I am adamant." Varmous shook his head sadly. "Cugel, I am disappointed in you. Do not forget that I helped acquire the vessel at some risk to my reputation. My planning and my magic were decisive. You only pulled on a rope. Remember also that at Kaspara Vitatus we part company. You will continue to Torquil while I fare south in my vessel." Varmous shrugged. "I expect no difficulties except those of the next few minutes. We must discover which among our premier passengers are truly strident and which can be induced to ride the carriages." "That is reasonable," said Cugel. "I see that there are tricks to the trade, which I will be at pains to learn. Just so. Now, as to tactics, we must always seem of the same mind, otherwise the passengers will play us one against the other, and all control is lost. Since we cannot confer on each case, let us signal our opinions in this fashion: a cough for the boat and a sniff for the carriage." "Agreed." Arriving at the boat, the passengers stood back in skepticism. Perilous, who was small, thin, hot-eyed, and seemed to be constructed only of nerves knotted around bones, went so far as to suggest duplicity. "Varmous, what is your plot? You take our terces, put us in the cabins of this ruined vessel, then go quietly off with your caravan. Is that the way of it? Be warned, I was not born yesterday." "Boats do not ordinarily sail on the dry land," murmured the aesthete Clissom. "Quite true," said Varmous. "By Cugel's magic, this vessel will fly safely and smoothly through the air." Cugel spoke in a serious voice. "Because of a regrettable oversight, too many passengers have been booked aboard the Avventura, and 4 persons will be required to ride in our premier carriage, at the head of the column where they can enjoy an intimate view of the nearby landscape. In this connection, let me ask, who among you suffers either vertigo or an obsessive fear of heights?" Perilous fairly danced to the spasmodic forces of his emotion. "I shall not change to inferior accommodations. I was first to pay over my terces, and Varmous guaranteed me a top priority. If necessary, I can bring the constable, who witnessed the transaction. He will support my case." Varmous coughed significantly, and Cugel coughed as well. Ermald took Varmous aside, and spoke a few urgent words in his ear, whereupon Varmous raised his hands to the sides of his head and pulled at his golden curls. He looked at Cugel and coughed sharply. Clissom said, "For me there is no choice, only stark necessity. I cannot tolerate the roadside dust. I would wheeze and gasp ere it go into asthmatic convulsions." Perilous seemed to find Clissom's sonorous diction and Epicurean mannerisms offensive. He snapped, "If indeed you are so aesthetic, are you not rash to venture so far out along the caravan trails?" Clissom, rolling his eyes to the sky, spoke in his richest tones. "As I spend the seconds of my life on this dying world, I am never dismal nor sodden with woe. There is too much glory, too much wonder. I am a pilgrim on a lifelong quest. I search here, there, everywhere, for that elusive quality," Perilous said impatiently. "How does this bear upon your asthma?" "The connection is both implicit and explicit. I vowed that, come what may, I would sing my odes at the festival, even if contorted in the face from an asthmatic fit. When I found that I might journey in the clean upper air, my rapture knew no bounds." "Bah," muttered Perilous. "Perhaps we all are asthmatic. Varmous has never troubled to ask." During the discussion, Varmous whispered into Cugel's ear. "Ermald reveals that she is pregnant with child. She fears that, if subjected to the jolts and jars of the carriage, an untoward event might occur. There is no help for it. She must ride in cushioned ease aboard the Avventura." "I agree, in all respects," said Cugel. Their attention was attracted by Ivanella's merry laugh. "I have full faith in Varmous." "Why?" "Because I paid double fare for the best possible accommodation which, so he assured me, I could choose myself. I therefore select the after cabin. Cugel can bed himself down with the other teamsters." Cugel gave a distinct sniff, and spoke sharply. In this case, Varmous referred only to the carriages. A lad like you will enjoy jumping on and off and gathering berries along the way. The Avventura has been reserved for persons of taste and breeding, such as Clissom and Ermalda. What of me? Cried the ecclesiarch Robbie. I am studied in 4 infinities, and I sit as a full member of the collegium. I am accustomed to special treatment. In order to perform my meditations, I need a quiet place, such as the cabin. Nicephor, with a rustling and a sour smell, took 2 steps forward. She spoke in a curious, husky whisper. I will ride the ship. Whoever interferes will be tainted. Ivanello threw his head back and looked at the woman through half-closed lids. Tainted? How do you mean tainted? Do you truly care to learn? Came the husky whisper. Cugel, suddenly alert, looked around the group. Where were Dr. Lalanki and his wards? In sudden apprehension, he ran around to the gangplank and bounded aboard. His fears were well realized. The 3 mimes had secluded themselves in the after cabin. Dr. Lalanki stood in the doorway making signals. At the sight of Cugel, he cried out in vexation, irritating little creatures. Once they decide upon a whim, they are beyond control. Sometimes I am beside myself with frustration, I admit it freely. Nevertheless, they must leave my cabin. Lalanki showed a wan smile. I can do nothing. Persuade them to leave however you like. Cugel went into the cabin. The 3 maidens sat on the bunk watching him through large gray eyes. Cugel pointed to the door. Out with you. This is the captain's cabin, and I am the captain. The maidens with one accord drew up their legs and folded their arms around their knees. Yes, yes, charming indeed, said Cugel. I am not sure whether or not I have the taste for such epicene little creatures. Under proper circumstances, I am willing to experiment, but not in a group of 3, which would be distracting. So come now, remove your fragile little bodies, or I must eject you. The maidens sat still as owls. Cugel heaved a sigh. So it must be. He started toward the bed, but was interrupted by the impatient voice of Varmous. Cugel, where are you? We need to make decisions. Cugel went out on deck to find that all the premier passengers had climbed the gangplank and were disputing possession of the cabins. Varmous told Cugel, we can delay no longer. I will bring up the caravan and we will tow the boat behind the first carriage. Cugel cried out in fury. There are too many passengers aboard. 4 must take to the carriages. Meanwhile, Dr. Lalanki and his troop have taken my cabin. Varmous shrugged his ponderous shoulders. Since you are captain, you need only issue the appropriate order. Meanwhile, remove the mooring lines all but 1 and prepare your magic. Varmous descended to the ground. Wait, cried Cugel. Where is the steward to cook and serve our meals? All in good time, said Varmous. You will prepare the noon lunch, as you have nothing better to do. Now pull up your gangplank. Make ready for departure. Seething with annoyance, Cugel tied his rope from the stem head ring to the trunk of a cypress, then drew aboard the other lines. With the help of Dr. Lalanki and Clissom, he pulled aboard the gangplank. The caravan came along the road. Varmous loosened the rope from the cypress, and the boat floated into the air. Varmous tied the rope to the back of the first carriage, which was pulled by 2 farlocks of the bulky black ganghorn breed. Without further ado, Varmous climbed aboard the carriage, and the caravan set off along the river road. Cugel looked about the deck. The passengers lined the rails, looking out over the countryside and congratulating themselves upon their mode of transport. A semblance of camaraderie had already come into being, affecting all save Nicephor, who sat huddled in a rather peculiar posture beside the hold. Dr. Lalanki also stood somewhat apart. Cugel joined him by the rail. Have you removed your wards from my cabin? Dr. Lalanki gravely shook his head. They are curious little creatures, innocent and without guile, motivated only by the force of their own needs. Surely they must obey your commands. Through some extraordinary flexibility of feature, Dr. Lalanki managed to seem both apologetic and amused. So one would think. I often wonder how they regard me, certainly not as their master. Most singular. How did they come into your custody? I must inform you that I am a man of great wealth. I live beside the Zongle River not far from Old Romarth. My manse is built of rare woods, tyrinch, gauze de fono, skeel, purple trank, camphor, and a dozen others. My life might well be one of ease and splendor, but to validate the fact of my existence, I annotate the lives and works of the great magicians. My collection of memorabilia and curious adjuncts is remarkable. As he spoke, his eyes rested upon the scale spatterlight, which Cugel used for a hat ornament. Cugel asked cautiously, "And you yourself are a magician?" "Alas, I lack the strength. I can grasp a trifling spell against stinging insects, and another to quiet howling dogs, but magic like yours, which wafts a ship through the air, is beyond my capacity. And while we are on the subject, what of the object you wear on your hat? It exhales an unmistakable flux." "The object has a curious history, which I will relate at a more convenient time," said Cugel. "At this moment, of course, you are more interested in the mimes, as I call them, and this may well be the function for which they were contrived. I am mostly interested in ejecting them from my cabin. I will be brief, though I must revert to Grand Mausoleum of the late 18th Aeon. The arch-magician Mole Leilio lived in a palace cut from a single moonstone. Even today, if you walk the plain of gray shades, you may find a shard or two. When I excavated the old crypts, I found a camben box containing 3 figurines of cracked and discolored ivory, each no larger than my finger. I took these objects to my manse and thought to wash away the grime, but they absorbed water as fast as I applied it, and I finally put them into basins to soak overnight. In the morning I found the 3 as you see them now. I used the names Sush, Skazja, and Relise after the Trecinthian graces and tried to give them speech. Never have they uttered a sound, not even one to the other. They are strange creatures, oddly sweet, and I could detail their conduct for hours. I call them mimes because when the mood comes on them, they will posture and preen and simulate 100 situations, none of which I understand. I have learned to let them to do as they will. In return, they allow me to care for them. All very well, said Cugel. Now the mimes of the late 18th Aeon must discover the reality of today, as embodied in the person of Cugel. I warn you, I may be forced to eject them bodily. Dr. Lalanki shrugged sadly. I am sure that you will be as gentle as possible. What are your plans? The time for planning is over. Cugel marched to the door of the cabin and flung it wide. The 3 sat as before, staring at Cugel with wondering eyes. Cugel stood to the side and pointed to the door. Out! Go! Depart! Be off with you! I am ready to lie down on my bunk and take my rest. None of the 3 twitched so much as a muscle. Cugel stepped forward and took the arm of the maiden facing him on his right. Instantly the room fluttered with motion, and before Cugel understood what was happening, he was propelled from the cabin. Cugel angrily ran back within and tried to seize the nearest of the mimes. She slipped sober-faced from his grasp, and again the room seemed full of fluttering figures, up, down, and around like moths. Finally, Cugel managed to seize one from behind and, carrying her to the door, thrust her out on deck. At the same time, he was thrust forward, and instantly the ejected maiden returned into the cabin. The other passengers had come to watch. All laughed and called out jocular remarks, save only Nicephor, who paid no heed. Dr. Lalanki spoke as if in vindication. You see how it goes? The more abrupt your conduct, the more determined their response. Cugel said through gritted teeth, They will come out to eat. Then we shall see. Dr. Lalanki shook his head. That is an unreliable hope. Their appetites are slight. Now and then they will take a bit of fruit, or a sweet cake, or a sip of wine. Shame, Cugel, said Ermalda. Would you starve 3 poor girls already so pale and peaked? If they dislike starvation, they can leave my cabin. The ecclesiarch lifted high a remarkably long white forefinger, with knobbed knuckles and a yellow fingernail. Cugel, you cultivate your senses as if they were hothouse plants. Why not, once and for all, break the tyranny of your internal organs? I will give you a tract to study. Clissom spoke. In the last analysis, the comfort of your passengers must supersede your own. Another matter. Varmous guaranteed a gracious cuisine of 5 or 6 courses. The sun has risen high, and it is time that you set about your preparations for lunch. Cugel said at last, If Varmous made this guarantee, let Varmous do the cooking. Perilous set up an outcry, but Cugel would not relent. My own problems are paramount. Then what is our recourse? Demanded Perilous. Cugel pointed to the gunwale. Slide down the rope and complain to Varmous. In any case, do not trouble me. Perilous marched to the gunwale and raised a great shout. Varmous turned up his broad face. What is the difficulty? It lies with Cugel. You must attend to the matter at once. Varmous patiently halted the caravan, pulled down the boat, and climbed aboard. Well then, what now? Peruquil, Clissom, and Cugel spoke together, until Varmous held up his hands. One at a time, if you please. Peruquil, what is your complaint? Peruquil pointed a trembling finger at Cugel. He is like a stone. He shrugs off our demands for food and will not relinquish accommodations to those who paid dearly for them. With a sigh, Varmous said, Well then, Cugel, how do you account for your conduct? In no way whatever. Evict those insane maidens from my cabin, or the Avventura no longer follows the caravan, but sails to best advantage on the wind. Varmous turned to Dr. Lalanki. There is no help for it. We must submit to Cugel's demand. Call them out. But where then will we sleep? There are 3 bunks in the crew's forecastle for the maidens. There is another bunk in the 4P carpenter's shop, which is quiet, and which will suit his reverence Golf Robbie very well. We will put Ermalda and Nicephor in the port cabins, Peruquil and Ivanello in the starboard cabins, while you and Clissom will share the double cabin. All problems are thereby solved, so let the maidens come forth. Dr. Lalanki said dubiously, That is the nub of the matter. They will not come. Cugel tried twice to put them out. Twice they ejected him instead. Ivanello, lounging to the side, said, And a most entertaining spectacle it was. Cugel came flying out as if he were trying to leap a wide ditch. Dr. Lalanki said, They probably misunderstood Cugel's intentions. I suggest that the 3 of us enter together. Varmous, you may go first, then I will follow and Cugel can bring up the rear. Allow me to make the signs. The 3 entered the cabin to find the maidens seated demurely on the bunk. Dr. Lalanki made a series of signs. With every show of docility, the 3 filed from the cabin. Varmous shook his head in bewilderment. I cannot understand the furor. Cugel, is this the extent of your complaint? I will say this, the Avventura will continue to sail with the caravan. Clissom pulled at his plump chin. Since Cugel refuses to cook, where and how do we partake of the fine cuisine you advertised? In a spiteful voice, Peruquil said, Cugel suggested that you yourself should do the cooking. I have more serious responsibilities, as Cugel well knows, said Varmous stiffly. It seems that I must assign a steward to the ship. Leaning over the gunwale, he called, Send Poreg aboard! The 3 maidens suddenly performed a giddy gyration, then a leaping, crouching ballet of postures, which they accented with mocking glances and flippant gestures toward Cugel. Dr. Lalanki interpreted the movements. They are expressing an emotion or, better, an attitude. I would not dare attempt a translation. Cugel turned away indignantly, in time to glimpse a flutter of fusty brown satin and the closing of the door to his cabin. In a fury, Cugel called out to Varmous, Now the woman Nicephor has taken over my cabin. This folderol must stop, said Varmous. He knocked on the door. Madame Nicephor, you must remove to your own quarters. From within came a husky whisper, barely audible. I will stay here, since I must have the dark. That is impossible. We have already allotted this cabin to Cugel. Cugel must go elsewhere. Madam, I regret that Cugel and I must enter the cabin and conduct you to your proper berth. I will place a taint. Varmous looked toward Cugel with puzzled blue eyes. What does she mean by that? I am not quite clear, said Cugel. But no matter. Caravan regulations must be enforced. This is our first concern. Quite so, otherwise we invite chaos. Here, at least, we are agreed. Enter the cabin, I stand resolutely at your back. Varmous settled his blouse, squared the hat upon his golden curls, pushed the door ajar and stepped into the cabin, with Cugel on his heels. Varmous uttered a strangled cry and lurched back into Cugel, but not before Cugel discovered an acrid stench so vile and incisive that his teeth felt tender in their sockets. Varmous stumbled to the rail, leaned back on his elbows and looked blearily across the deck. Then, with an air of great fatigue, he climbed over the gunwale and lowered himself to the ground. He spoke a few words to Poreg the steward, who thereupon boarded the vessel. Varmous slackened the rope and the Avventura once more floated high. Cugel, after a moment's reflection, approached Dr. Lalanki.
I am impressed by your gentility, and in turn, I will be generous. You and your wards are now assigned to the captain's cabin.
Dr. Lalanki became more saturnine than ever. My wards would be confused. For all their frivolity, they are deeply sensitive and easily disturbed. The forecastle, as it turns out, is quite comfortable. Just as you like. Cugel sauntered forward to find that the cabin formerly allotted to Nicephor had been taken by the ecclesiarch Golf Robbie, while Poreg the steward had settled into the carpenter's shop. Cugel made a hissing sound between his teeth. Finding an old cushion and a ragged tarpaulin, he contrived a tent on the foredeck and there took up residence. The river chain meandered down a wide valley demarcated into fields and folds by ancient stone walls, with groups of stone farmsteads huddling under black feather trees and indigo oaks. At the side, weather-worn hills basking in the red sunlight trapped loons of black shadow in their hollow places. All day the caravan followed the banks of the river, passing through the villages Gouliard, Trunash, and Scleve. At sundown, camp was made in a meadow beside the river. When the sun lurched low behind the hills, a great fire was built, and the travelers gathered in a circle to warm themselves against the evening chill. The premier passengers dined together on coarse but hearty fare, which even Clissom found acceptable, all except Nicephor, who kept to her cabin, and the mimes, who sat cross-legged beside the hull of the Avventura staring fascinated into the flames. Ivanello appeared in a costume of the richest quality, loose breeches of a gold, amber and black corduroy twill, fitted black boots, a loose fusk ivory shirt embroidered with gold floriations. From his right ear, on 3 inches of chain, dangled a milk opal sphere almost an inch in diameter, a gem which fascinated the 3 mimes to the edge of entrancement. Varmous poured wine with a generous hand, and the company became convivial. One of the ordinary passengers, a certain Anskdeveska, called out, "Here we sit, strangers cast willy-nilly into each other's company. I suggest that each of us in turn introduces himself and tells his story of whom he is and something of his achievements." Varmous clapped his hands together. "Why not? I will start off. Madlik, serve more wine. My story is essentially simple. My father kept a fowl run at Waterwan across the estuary and produced fine fowl for the tables of the locality. I thought to follow in his footsteps, until he took a new spouse who could not abide the odor of burning feathers. To please this woman, my father gave up the fowl and thought to cultivate lurkfish in shallow ponds, which I excavated from the ground. But owls gathered in the trees and so annoyed the spouse that she went off with a dealer in rare incenses. We then operated a ferry service from Waterwan to Port Perdush, until my father took too much wine and, falling asleep in the ferry, drifted out to sea. I then became involved in the caravan trade, and you know all the rest." Golf Robbie spoke. "I hope that my life, in contrast to that of Varmous, will prove inspiring, especially to the younger persons present, or even to such marginal personalities as Cugel and Ivanello." Ivanello had gone to sit beside the mimes. He called out, "Now then, insult me as you will, but do not pair me off with Cugel." Cugel refused to dignify the comment with his attention. Golf Robbie showed only a faint, cold smile. "I have lived a life of rigid discipline, and the benefits of my regimen must be clear to all. While still a catechumen at the Obtrank Normalcy, I made a mark with the purity of my logic. As first fellow of the Collegium, I composed a tract demonstrating that succulent gluttony sickens the spirit like dry rot in wood. Even now, when I drink wine, I mix therein 3 drops of aspergantium, which brings about a bitter taste. I now sit on the council, and I am a pantologist of the final revelation." "An enviable achievement," declared Varmous. "I drink to your continued success, and here is a goblet of wine without aspergantium, that you may join us in the toast without distraction from the vile flavors." "Thank you," said Golf Robbie. "This is a legitimate usage." Cugel now addressed the group. "I am a grandee of Almery, where I am heir to an ancient estate. While striving against injustice, I ran afoul of an evil magician who sent me north to die." Little did he realize that submission is foreign to my nature. Cugel looked around the group. Ivanello tickled the mimes with a long straw. Clissom and Golf Robbie argued Vidal's doctrine of isoptogenesis in a quiet undertone. Dr. Lelanki and Cugel discussed the hostelries of Torquil. Somewhat sulkily, Cugel returned to his seat. Varmous, who had been planning the route with Veska, finally noticed and called out, "Well done, Cugel. Most interesting indeed." "Madlik, I believe that 2 more jugs of the economy-grade wine are in order. It is not often that we celebrate such festivals along the trail. Lelanki, do you plan to present one of your tableaus?" Dr. Lelanki made signals. The maidens, preoccupied with Ivanello's nonsense, at last noticed the gesticulations. They leapt to their feet, and for a few moments performed a set of dizzying saltations. Ivanello came over to Dr. Lelanki and whispered a question into his ear. Dr. Lelanki frowned. "The question is indelicate or at least over-explicit, but the answer is yes." Ivanello put another discreet question, to which Dr. Lelanki's response was definitely frosty. "I doubt if such ideas even enter their heads." He turned away and resumed his conversation with Perilous. Veska brought out his concertina and played a merry tune. Ermalda, despite Varmus's horrified expostulations, jumped to her feet and danced a spirited jig. When Ermalda had finished dancing, she took Varmus aside. "My symptoms were gas pains only. I should have reassured you, but the matter slipped my mind." "I am much relieved," said Varmus. "Cugel will also be pleased, since as captain of the Avventura, he would have been forced to serve as obstetrician." The evening proceeded. Each of the group had a story to tell or a concept to impart, and all sat while the fire burned down to embers. Clissom, so it developed, had composed several odes, and upon urging from Ermalde recited 6 stanzas from an extended work entitled, "O Time, Be Thou the Sorry Dastard," in dramatic fashion, with vocal cadenzas between each stanza. Cugel brought out his packet of cards and offered to teach Varmus and Veska skaks, which Cugel defined as a game of pure chance. Both preferred to listen as Golf Robbie responded to the indolent questions of Ivanello. No confusion whatever. The Collegium is often known as the Convergence, or even as the Hub, in a jocular sense, of course, but the essence is identical. "I fear that you have the better of me," said Ivanello. "I am lost in a jungle of terminology. Aha, there speaks the voice of the layman. I will simplify." "Please do. Think of a set of imaginary spokes, representing between 20 and 30 infinities. The exact number is still uncertain. They converge in a focus of pure sentience. They intermingle, then diverge in the opposite direction. The location of this hub is precisely known. It is within the precincts of the Collegium." Varmus called out a question. "What does it look like?" Golf Robbie gazed a long moment into the dying fire. "I think that I will not answer that question," he said at last. "I would create as many false images as there were ears to hear me." "Half as many," Clissom pointed out delicately. Ivanello smiled lazily up toward the night sky, where Alfard the Lonely stood in the ascendant. "It would seem that a single infinity would suffice for your studies. Is it not grandiose to preempt so many?" Golf Robbie thrust forward his great narrow face. "Why not study for a term or 2 at the Collegium and discover for yourself? I will give thought to the matter. The second day was much like the first." The Farlocks ambled steadily along the road, and a breeze from the west pushed the Avventura slightly ahead of the foremost carriage. Poreg the steward prepared an ample breakfast of poached oysters, sugar-glazed kumquats and scones, sprinkled with the scarlet roe of land crabs. Nicephor remained immured in her cabin. Poreg brought a tray to the door and knocked. "Your breakfast, Mad Nicephor!" "Take it away," came a hoarse whisper from within. "I want no breakfast." Poreg shrugged and removed both the tray and himself as rapidly as possible, since the fetor of Nicephore's taint had not yet departed the area. At lunch matters went in the same style, and Cugel instructed Poreg to serve Nicephor no more meals until she appeared in the dining saloon. During the afternoon, Ivanello brought out a long-necked lute tied with a pale blue ribbon, and sang sentimental ballads to gentle chords from the lute. The mimes came to watch and wonder, and it became a topic of general discussion as to whether or not they heard the music, or even grasped the meaning of Ivanello's activities. In any event, they lay on their bellies, chins resting on their folded fingers, watching Ivanello with grave gray eyes and, so it might seem, dumb adoration. Ivanello was emboldened to stroke Skazja's short black hair. Instantly Sush and Releyes crowded close, and Ivanello had to caress them as well. Smiling and pleased with his success, Ivanello played and sang another ballad, while Cugel watched sourly from the foredeck. Today the caravan passed only a single village, Port Titus, and the landscape seemed perceptibly wilder. Ahead rose a massive stone scarp through which the river had carved a narrow gorge, with the road running close alongside. Halfway through the afternoon, the caravan came upon a crew of timber cutters, loading their timber aboard a barge. Varmous brought the caravan to a halt. Jumping down from the carriage, he went to make inquiries and received unsettling news. A section of mountain had collapsed into the gorge, rendering the river road impassable. The timber cutters came out into the road and pointed north toward the hills. A mile ahead you will come upon a side road. It leads up through Tuner's Gap and off across Aldish Waste. After 2 miles the road forks and you must veer to the right around the gorge and in due course down to Lake Zaol and Kaspara Vitatus. Varmous turned to look up toward the gap. And the road, is it safe or dangerous? The oldest timber cutter said. We have no exact knowledge, since no one has recently come down through Tuner's Gap. This in itself may be a negative sign. Another timber cutter spoke. At the Waterman's Inn, I have heard rumors of a nomad band down from the karst. They are said to be stealthy and savage, but since they fear the dark, they will not attack by night. You are a strong company and should be safe unless they take you from ambush. An alert watch should be maintained. The youngest of the timber cutters said, What of the rock goblins? Are they not a serious menace? Bah, said the old man. Such things are boogerboos, on the order of wind-stick devils, by which to frighten saucy children. Still, they exist, declared the young timber cutter. That, at least, is my best information. Bah, said the old cutter a second time. At the Waterman's Inn they drink beer by the gallon, and on their way home they see goblins and devils behind every bush. The second cutter said thoughtfully, I will reveal my philosophy. It is better to keep watch for rock goblins and wind-stick devils and never see them, than not to keep watch so that they leap upon you unawares. The old cutter made a peremptory sign. Return to work. Your gossip is delaying this important caravan. And to Varmous, proceed by Tuner's Gap. A week and a day should bring you into Kaspara Vitatus. Varmous returned to the carriage. The caravan moved forward. After a mile, a side road turned off toward Tuner's Gap, and Varmous reluctantly departed the river road. The side road wound back and forth up over the hills to Tuner's Gap, then turned out across a flat plain. The time was now almost sunset. Varmous elected to halt for the night where a stream issued from a copse of black deodars. He arranged the wagons and carriages with care and set out a guard fence of metal strands which, when activated, would discharge streamers of purple lightning toward hostile intruders, thus securing the caravan against night-wandering hoons, herbs, and grus. Once again a great fire was built, with wood broken from the deodars. The premier passengers partook of 3 preliminary courses served by poreg aboard the Avventura, then joined the ordinaries for bread, stew, and sour greens around the fire. Varmous served wine, but with a hand less lavish than on the previous evening. After supper, Varmous addressed the group. As everyone knows, we have made a detour, which should cause us neither inconvenience nor, so I trust, delay. However, we now travel the Aldish Waste, a land which is strange to me. I feel compelled to take special safeguards. You will notice the guard fence, which is intended to deter intruders. Ivanello, lounging to the side, could not restrain a facetious remark. What if intruders leap the fence? Varmous paid him no heed. The fence is dangerous. Do not approach it. Dr. Lalanki, you must instruct your wards as best you can of this danger. I will do so. The Aldish Waste is a wild territory. We may encounter nomads down from the karst or even the Great Erm itself. These folk, either men or half-men, are unpredictable. Therefore I am setting up a system of vigilant lookouts. Cugel, who rides the Avventura and makes his headquarters at the bow, shall be our chief lookout. He is keen, sharp-eyed, and suspicious. Also, he has nothing better to do. I will watch from my place on the forward carriage, and Slavoj, who rides the last wagon, shall be the rear guard. But it is Cugel, with his commanding view across the landscape, to whom we shall look for protection. That is all I wish to say. Let the festivities proceed." Clissom cleared his throat and stepped forward, but before he could recite so much as a syllable, Avventura took up his lute and, banging lustily at the strings, sang a rather vulgar ballad. Clissom stood with a pained smile frozen on his face, then turned away and resumed his seat. A wind blew down from the north, causing the flames to leap and the smoke to billow. Avventura cried out a light-hearted curse. He put down his lute and began to toy with the mimes, whom, as before, he had hypnotized with his music. Tonight he became bolder in his caresses, and encountered no protest so long as he evenly shared his attentions. Cugel watched with disapproval. He muttered to Dr. Lelanki, "Avventura is persuading your wards to laxity. That may well be his intent," agreed Dr. Lelanki. "And you are not concerned?" "Not in the least." Clissom once again came forward, and holding high a scroll of manuscript, looked smilingly around the group. Avventura, leaning back into the arms of Sush, with Relies pressed against him on one side, and Skazja on the other, bent his head over his lute, and drew forth a series of plangent chords. Clissom seemed on the verge of calling out a quizzical complaint, when the wind rolled a cloud of smoke into his face, and he retreated coughing. Avventura, head bent so that his chestnut curls glinted in the firelight, smiled and played glissandos on his lute. Ermalda indignantly marched around the fire, to stand looking down at Avventura. In a brittle voice she said, "Clissom is about to chant one of his odes. I suggest that you put aside your lute and listen." "I will do so with pleasure," said Avventura. Ermalda turned and marched back the way she had come. The three mimes jumped to their feet and strutted behind her, cheeks puffed out, elbows outspread, bellies thrust forward and knees jerking high. Ermalda, becoming aware of the activity, turned, and the mimes capered away, to dance for 5 seconds with furious energy like Maenads, before they once again flung themselves down beside Avventura. Ermalda, smiling a fixed smile, went off to converse with Clissom, and both sent scathing glances toward Avventura, who, putting aside his lute, now gave free rein to his fondling of the mimes. Far from resenting his touch, they pressed ever more closely upon him. Avventura bent his head and kissed Relies full on the mouth. Instantly both Sush and Skazja thrust forward their faces for like treatment. Cugel gave a croak of disgust. "The man is insufferable." Dr. Lelanki shook his head. "Candidly, I am surprised by their complacence. They have never allowed me to touch them."
"Ah well, I see that Varmous has become restless. The evening draws to a close." Varmous, who had risen to his feet, stood listening to the sounds of night. He went to inspect the guard fence, then addressed the travelers.
"Do not become absent-minded. Do not walk in your sleep. Make no rendezvous in the forest. I am now going to my bed, and I suggest the same for all of you, since tomorrow we travel long and far across the Eildish waste." Clissom would not be denied. Summoning all his dignity, he stepped forward. "I have heard several requests for another of my pieces, to which I shall now respond." Ermalda clapped her hands, but many of the others had gone off to their beds. Clissom pursed his mouth against vexation. "I will now recite my 13th ode, subtitled, 'Gaunt are the towers of my mind.'" He arranged himself in a suitable posture, but the wind came in a great gust, causing the fire to wallow and flare. Clouds of smoke roiled around the area, and those still present hurried away. Clissom threw his hands high in despair and retired from the scene. Cugel spent a restless night. Several times he heard a distant cry expressing dejection, and once he heard a chuckling, hooting conversation from the direction of the forest. Varmous aroused the caravan at an early hour, while the pre-dawn sky still glowed purple. Poreg the steward served a breakfast of tea, scones, and a savory mince of clams, barley, kangol, and pennywort. As usual, Nicephor failed to make an appearance, and this morning Avventura was missing as well. Poreg called down to Varmous suggesting that he send Avventura aboard for his breakfast, but a survey of the camp yielded nothing. Avvenura's possessions occupied their ordinary places. Nothing seemed to be missing except Avventura himself, Varmous, sitting at a table, made a ponderous investigation, but no one could supply any information whatever. Varmous examined the ground near the guard fence, but discovered no signs of disturbance. He finally made an announcement. Avventura, for all practical purposes, has vanished into thin air. I discover no hint of foul play, still I cannot believe that he disappeared voluntarily. The only explanation would seem to be baneful magic. In truth, I am at a loss for any better explanation. Should anyone entertain theories, or even suspicions, please communicate them to me. Meanwhile, there is no point remaining here. We must keep to our schedule, and the caravan will now get underway. Drivers, bring up your farlocks. Cugel, to your post at the bow. The caravan moved out upon Ildish Waste, and the fate of Avventura remained obscure. The road, now little more than a track, led north to a fork. Here the caravan veered eastward and proceeded beside the hills which rolled away as far as the eye could reach. The landscape was bleak and dry, supporting only a few stunted gong trees, an occasional tumble of cactus, an isolated dendron, black or purple or red. Halfway through the morning, Varmous called up to the ship. Cugel, are you keeping a sharp watch? Cugel looked down over the gunwale. I could watch with more purpose if I knew what I was watching for. You are looking for hostile nomads, especially those hidden in ambush. Cugel scanned the countryside. I see nothing answering to this description, only hills and waste, although far ahead I notice the dark line of a forest, or maybe it is only a river fringed with trees. Very good, Cugel. Maintain your lookout. The day passed and the line of dark trees seemed to recede before them, and at sundown camp was made on a sandy area open to the sky. As usual, a fire was built, but the disappearance of Avventura weighed heavy, and though Varmous served out wine, no one drank with cheer, and conversation was pitched in low tones. As before, Varmous arranged his guard fence. He spoke again to the company. The mystery remains profound. Since we are without a clue, I recommend everyone to extreme caution. Certainly do not so much as approach the guard fence. The night passed without incident. In the morning, the caravan got underway in good time, with Cugel once more serving as lookout. As the day went by, the countryside became somewhat less arid. The line of trees now could be seen to mark the course of a river wandering down from the hills and out across the waste. Arriving at the riverbank, the road turned abruptly south and followed the river to a stone bridge of 5 arches where Varmous called a halt to allow the teamsters to water their farlocks. Cugel ordered the rope to shorten itself and so drew the Avventura down to the road. The premier passengers alighted and wandered here and there to stretch their legs. At the entrance to the bridge stood a monument 10 feet tall, holding a bronze plaque to the attention of those who passed. The characters were illegible to Cugel. Golf Robbie thrust close his long nose, then shrugged and turned away. Dr. Lalanki, however, declared the script to be a version of Sarsonian, an influential dialect of the 19th aeon, in common use for more than 4,000 years. The text is purely ceremonial, said Dr. Lalanki. It reads, Travelers, as dry-shod you cross the thundering turmoil of the river Sick, be advised that you have been assisted by the beneficence of Kaiv, Lord Ruler of Karad and Guardian of the Universe. As we can see, the river Sick no longer thunders a turmoil, but we can still acknowledge the generosity of King Kaiv. Indeed, it is wise to do so. And Dr. Lalanki preformed a polite genuflection to the monument. Superstition, scoffed Golf Robbie. At the Collegium, we turn down our ears in reverence only to the nameless syncresis at the core of the hub.
So it may be, said Dr. Lalanki indifferently, and moved away.
Cugel looked from Golf Robbie at Dr. Lalanki, then quickly performed a genuflection before the monument. What? Cried the gaunt ecclesiarch. You too, Cugel. I took you for a man of judgment. That is precisely why I gave honor to the monument. I judged that the rite could do no harm and cost very little. Varmous dubiously rubbed his nose, then made a ponderous salute of his own, to the patent disgust of Golf Robbie. The farlocks were brought back to their traces. Cugel caused the Avventura to rise high in the air, and the caravan proceeded across the bridge. During the middle afternoon, Cugel became drowsy and dropping his head upon his arms, dozed off into a light slumber. Time passed and Cugel became uncomfortable. Blinking and yawning, he surveyed the countryside, and his attention was caught by stealthy movements behind a thicket of smokeberry bushes which lined the road. Cugel leaned forward and perceived several dozen short, swarthy men wearing baggy pantaloons, dirty vests of various colors, and black kerchiefs tied around their heads. They carried spears and battle hooks, and clearly intended harm upon the caravan. Cugel shouted down to Varmous, "Halt! Prepare your weapons! Bandits hide in ambush behind yonder thicket." Varmous pulled up the caravan and blew a blast on his signal horn. The teamsters took up weapons, as did many of the passengers, and prepared to face an onslaught. Cugel brought the boat down so that the premier passengers might also join the fight. Varmous came over to the boat. "Exactly where is the ambush? How many lie in wait?" Cugel pointed toward the ticket. "They crouch behind the smokeberry bushes, to the number of about 23. They carry spears and snaffle irons." "Well done, Cugel. You have saved the caravan." Varmous studied the terrain, then taking 10 men armed with swords, dart guns, and poison go-thithers, went out to reconnoiter. Half an hour passed. Varmous, hot, dusty, and irritated, returned with his squad. He spoke to Cugel again. "Where did you think to observe this ambush?" "As I told you, behind the thicket yonder. We combed the area and found neither bandits nor any sign of their presence." Cugel looked frowningly toward the thicket. "They slipped away when they saw that we were forewarned, leaving no traces. Are you sure of what you saw? Or were you having hallucinations?" "Naturally, I am sure of what I saw," declared Cugel indignantly. "Do you take me for a fool?" "Of course not," said Varmous soothingly. "Keep up the good work. Even if your savages were but phantasms, it is better to be safe than sorry. But next time look twice and verify before you cry out the alarm." Cugel had no choice but to agree, and returned aboard the Avventura. The caravan proceeded, past the now tranquil thicket, and Cugel once again kept an alert lookout. The night passed without incident, but in the morning, when breakfast was served, Ermold failed to make an appearance. As before, Varmous searched the ship and the area enclosed by the guard fence, but, like Ivanello, Ermold had disappeared as if into thin air. Varmous went so far as to knock on the door of Nicephor's cabin to assure himself that she was still aboard.
"Who is it?"
came the husky whisper. "It is Varmous. Are you well?" "I am well. I need nothing." Varmous turned to Cugel, his broad face creased with worry. "I have never known such dreadful events. What is happening?" Cugel spoke thoughtfully. "Neither Ivanello nor Ermaldo went off by choice, this is clear. They both rode the Avventura, which seems to indicate that the Bane also resides aboard the ship." "What, in the premier class? Such are the probabilities." Varmous clenched his massive fist. "This harm must be learned, and nailed to the counter." "Agreed. But how?" "Through vigilance and care. At night no one must venture from his quarters, except to answer the call of nature. To find the evil-doer waiting in the privy? That is not the answer." "Meanwhile, we cannot delay the caravan," muttered Varmous. "Cugel, to your post. Watch with care and discrimination." The caravan once again set off to the east. The road skirted close under the hills, which now showed harsh outcrops of rock and occasional growths of gnarled acacia. Dr. Lalanki sauntered forward and joined Cugel at the bow, and their conversation turned to the strange disappearances. Dr. Lalanki declared himself as mystified as everyone else. "There are endless possibilities, though none carry conviction. For instance, I could suggest that the ship itself is a harmful entity which during the night opens up its hold and ingests a careless passenger." "We have searched the hold," said Cugel. "We found only stores, baggage, and cockroaches. I hardly intended that you take the theory seriously. Still, if we contrive 10,000 theories, all apparently absurd, one among them almost certainly would be correct." The three mimes came up to the bow and amused themselves by strutting back and forth with long, loping, bent-kneed strides. Cugel looked at them with disfavor. What nonsense are they up to now? The three mimes wrinkled their noses. crossed their eyes and rounded their mouths into pursy circles, as if in soundless chortling, and looked toward Cugel sidelong as they pranced back and forth. Dr. Lalanki chuckled. It is their little joke. They think that they are imitating you, or so I believe. Cugel turned coldly away, and the three mimes ran back down the deck. Dr. Lalanki pointed ahead to a billow of clouds hanging above the horizon. They rise from Lake Zaul, beside Kaspara Vitatus, where the road turns north to Torquil. It is not my road. I journey south to Almeri. Just so. Dr. Lalanki turned away and Cugel was left alone at his vigil. He looked around for the mimes, half wishing that they would return and enliven the tedium, but they were engaged in a new and amusing game, tossing small objects down at the farlocks, which, when so struck, whisked high their tails. Cugel resumed his watch. To the south, the rocky hillside, ever more steep. To the north, the Eildish waste, an expanse streaked in subtle colors, dark pink, hazy black, gray maroon, touched here and there with the faintest possible bloom of dark blue and green. Time passed. The mimes continued their game, which the teamsters and even the passengers also seemed to enjoy. As the mimes tossed down bits of stuff, the teamsters and passengers jumped down to retrieve the objects. Odd, thought Cugel. Why was everyone so enthusiastic over a game so trifling? One of the objects glinted of metal as it fell. It was, thought Cugel, about the size and shape of a terce. Surely the mimes would not be tossing terces to the teamsters. Where would they have obtained such wealth? The mimes finished their game. The teamsters called up from below, "More! Continue the game! Why stop now?" The mimes performed a crazy gesticulation and tossed down an empty pouch, then went off to rest. Peculiar, thought Cugel. The pouch in some respects resembled his own, which of course was safely tucked away in his tent. He glanced down casually, then looked once again more sharply. The pouch was nowhere to be seen. Cugel ran raging to Dr. Lalanki, where he sat on the hold conversing with Clissom. Cugel cried out, "Your wards made off with my pouch. They threw my terces down to the teamsters, and my other adjuncts as well, including a valuable pot of boot dressing, and finally the pouch itself." Dr. Lalanki raised his black eyebrows. Indeed, the rascals. I wondered what could hold their attention so long. Please take this matter seriously. I hold you personally responsible. You must redress my losses. Dr. Lalanki smilingly shook his head. I regret your misfortune, Cugel, but I cannot repair all the wrongs of the world. Are they not your wards? In a casual sense only. They are listed on the Caravan manifest in their own names, which puts the onus for their acts upon Varmous. You may discuss the matter with him, or even the mimes themselves. If they took the pouch, let them repay the terces. These are not practical ideas. Here is one which is most practical. Return forward before we plunge headlong into danger. Dr. Lalanki turned away and resumed his conversation with Clissom. Cugel returned to the bow. He stared ahead, across the dismal landscape, considering how best to recover his losses. A sinister flurry of movement caught his eye. Cugel jerked forward and focused his gaze on the hillside, where a number of squat gray beings worked to pile heavy boulders, where the hillside beetled over the road. Cugel looked with care for several seconds. The creatures were plain in his vision, distorted half-human amloids with peaking scalps and neckless heads, so that their mouths opened directly into their upper torsos. Cugel made a final inspection and at last called down the alarm. Varmous, rock goblins on the hillside. Grave danger. Halt the caravan and sound the horn. Varmous pulled up his carriage and returned the hail. What do you see? Where is the danger? Cugel waved his arms and pointed. On that high bluff I see mountain goblins. They are piling rocks to tumble down upon the caravan. Varmous craned his neck and looked where Cugel had pointed. I can see nothing. They are gray like the rocks. They sidle askew and run crouching this way and that. Varmous rose in his seat and gave emergency signals to his teamsters. He pulled the ship down to the road. We will give them a great surprise, he told Cugel, and called to the passengers. Alight, if you please. I intend to attack the goblins from the air. Varmous brought 10 men armed with arrow guns and fire darts aboard the Avventura. He tied the mooring line to a strong farlock. Now, Cugel, let the rope extend so that we rise above the bluff, and we will send down our compliments from above. Cugel obeyed the order. The ship with its complement of armed men rose high into the air and drifted over the bluff. Varmous stood in the bow. Now, to the exact site of the ambush. Cugel pointed. Precisely there, in that tumble of rocks. Varmous inspected the hillside. At the moment I see no goblins. Cugel scanned the bluff with care, but the goblins had disappeared. All to the good. They saw our preparations and abandoned their plans. Varmous gave a surly grunt. Are you certain of your facts? You are sure that you saw rock goblins? Of course. I am not given to hysterics. Perhaps you were deceived by shadows among the rocks. Absolutely not. I saw them as clearly as I see you. Varmous looked at Cugel with thoughtful blue eyes. Do not feel that I am chiding you. You apprehended danger and, quite properly, cried out the alarm, though apparently in error. I will not belabor the matter, except to point out that this lack of judiciousness wastes valuable time. Cugel could find no answer to the imputations. Varmous went to the gunwale and called down to the driver of the lead carriage. Bring the caravan forward and pass the bluff. We will mount guard to ensure absolute security. The caravan moved past the bluff without untoward circumstance, whereupon the Avventura was lowered so that the premier passengers might re-embark. Varmous took Cugel aside. Your work is beyond reproach. Still, I have decided to augment the watch. Shilko, whom you see yonder, is a man of seasoned judgment. He will stand by your side, and each will validate the findings of the other. Shilko, step over here if you please. You and Cugel must now work in tandem. That will be my pleasure, said Shilko, a round-faced, stocky man with sand-colored hair and a fringe of curling whiskers. I look forward to the association. Cugel glumly took him aboard the ship, and, as the caravan moved ahead, the two went forward to the bow and took up their posts. Shilko, a man of affable volubility, spoke of everything imaginable in definitive detail. Cugel's responses were curt, which puzzled Shilko. In an aggrieved voice he explained, When I am engaged in this kind of work, I like a bit of conversation to while away the time. Otherwise it is a bore to stand here looking out at nothing in particular. After a while, one begins to observe mental figments and regard them as reality. He winked and grinned. Cugel? Cugel thought Shilko's joke in poor taste and looked away. Ah well, said Shilko. So goes the world. At noon, Shilko went off to the mess hall to take his lunch. He overindulged himself both in food and wine, so that during the afternoon he became drowsy. He surveyed the landscape and told Cugel, There is nothing out there but a lizard or two. This is my considered judgment, and now I propose to take a short nap. If you see anything, be sure to arouse me. He crawled into Cugel's tent and made himself comfortable, and Cugel was left to think bitter thoughts of his lost terses and discarded boot dressing. When the caravan halted for the night, Cugel went directly to Varmous. He cited the frivolous conduct of the mimes and complained of the losses he had suffered. Varmous listened with a mild but somewhat detached interest. Surely Dr. Lalanki intends a settlement? This is the point at issue. He disclaims responsibility in part and in some. He declares that you, as master of the caravan, must discharge all damages. Varmous, whose attention had been wandering, became instantly alert. He called on me to pay the losses? Exactly so. I now present to you this bill of accounting. Varmous folded his arms and took a quick step backward. Dr. Lalanki's thinking is inept. Cugel indignantly shook the accounting under Varmous's nose.
Are you telling me that you refuse to settle this obligation? It has nothing to do with me. The deed occurred aboard your vessel, the Avventura.
Cugel again thrust the bill upon Varmous. Then at least you must serve this accounting upon Dr. Lalanki and levy the payment. Varmous pulled at his chin. That is not the correct procedure. You are master of the Avventura. Hence, in your official capacity, you must summon Dr. Lalanki to a hearing and there levy whatever charges you think proper. Cugel looked dubiously toward Dr. Lalanki, where he stood in conversation with Clissom. I suggest that we approach Dr. Lalanki together and join our mutual authorities the better to compel justice. Varmous backed away another step. Do not involve me. I am only Varmous the wagoner, who rolls innocently along the ground. Cugel proposed further arguments, but Varmous put on a face of crafty obstinacy and would not be moved. Cugel finally went to a table where he drank wine and stared glumly into the fire. The evening passed slowly. A somber mood oppressed the entire camp. Tonight there were neither recitations, songs, nor jokes, and the company sat around the fire, conversing in desultory undertones. An unspoken question occupied all minds: who will be the next to disappear? The fire burned low, and the company reluctantly went off to their beds with many a glance over their shoulders and an exchange of nervous comments. So the night passed. The star Achernar moved up the eastern quadrant and declined into the west. The Farlocks grunted and snuffled as they slept. Far out on the waste, a blue light flickered into existence for a few seconds, then died and was seen no more. The rim of the east flushed first purple, then the red of dark blood. After several vain attempts, the sun broke free of the horizon and floated into the sky. With the rebuilding of the fire, the caravan came to life. Breakfast was set out, Farlocks were brought to their traces, and preparations were made for departure. Aboard the Avventura, the passengers made their appearance. Each in turn looked from face to face as if half expecting another disappearance. Poreg, the steward, served breakfast to all hands and carried a tray to the aft cabin. He knocked. "Madame Nicephor, I have brought your breakfast. We are worried as to your health." "I am well," came the whisper. "I wish nothing. You may go away." After breakfast, Cugel took Dr. Lelanki aside. "I have taken counsel with Varmous," said Cugel. "He assures me that, as master of the Avventura, I may make a demand on you for damages suffered as a result of your negligence. Here is the bill of account. You must pay over this sum at once." Dr. Lelanki gave the bill a brief inspection. His black eyebrows peaked even higher than ever. "This item, amazing. Boot dressing, 1 pot, value 1,000 terces. Are you serious?" "Naturally, the boot dressing contained a rare wax." Dr. Lelanki returned the bill. "You must present this bill to the persons at fault, namely Sush, Skazia, and Release." "What good will that do?" Dr. Lelanki shrugged. "I could not hazard a guess. Still, I disassociate myself from the entire affair." He bowed and strolled off to join Clissom, in whom he found qualities compatible with his own. Cugel went forward to the bow, where Shilko was already on duty. Shilko again showed a voluble tendency. Cugel, as before, replied in terse terms, and Shilko at last fell silent. The caravan meanwhile had moved into a region where hills rose to either side, with the road following the course of the valley between. Shilko looked along the barren hillsides. "I see nothing in these parts to worry us." "What of you, Cugel?" "At the moment I see nothing." Shilko took a last look around the landscape. "Excuse me a moment, I have a message for Poreg." He departed, and soon, from the galley, Cugel heard sounds of conviviality. Somewhat later, Shilko returned, lurching to the wine he had consumed. He called out in a hearty voice, "Ahoy there, Captain Cugel! How go the hallucinations?" "I do not understand your illusion," said Cugel frigidly. "No matter. Such things can happen to anyone." Shilko scanned the hillsides. "Have you anything to report?" "Nothing. Very good. That's the way to handle this job. A quick look here and a sharp glance there, then down to the galley for a taste of wine." Cugel made no comment, and Shilko, from boredom, took to cracking his knuckles. At the noon meal, Shilko again consumed more than was perhaps advisable, and during the afternoon became drowsy. "I will just catch 40 winks to calm my nerves," he told Cugel. "Keep a close watch on the lizards and call me if anything more important appears." He crawled into Cugel's tent and presently began to snore. Cugel leaned on the gunwale, formulating schemes to repair his fortunes. None seemed feasible, especially since Dr. Lelanki knew a few spells of elementary magic. Peculiar, those dark shapes along the ridge. What could cause them to jerk and jump in such a fashion? As if tall black shadows were thrusting quickly high to peer down at the caravan, then dodging back down out of sight. Cugel reached down and pulled at Shilko's leg. "Rouse yourself." Shilko emerged from the tent, blinking and scratching his head. "What now? Has Poreg brought my afternoon wine?" Cugel indicated the ridge. "What do you see?" Shilko looked with red-rimmed eyes along the skyline, but the shadows were now crouched behind the hills. He turned a quizzical gaze upon Cugel. "What do you perceive? Goblins disguised as pink rats, or centipedes dancing the Kazatska?" "Neither," said Cugel shortly. "I saw what I believe be a band of windstick devils. They are now in hiding on the far side of the hill. Shilko peered cautiously at Cugel and moved a step away. Most interesting. How many did you see?
I could make no count, but we had best call out the alarm to Varmous.
Shilko looked again along the skyline. I see nothing. Might your nerves once more be playing you tricks? Absolutely not. Well, please make certain before you call me again. Shilko dropped to his hands and knees and crawled into the tent. Cugel looked down to Varmous, riding placidly on the lead carriage. He opened his mouth to call down the alarm, then gloomily thought better of it and resumed his vigil. Minutes passed, and Cugel himself began to doubt the sightings. The road passed beside a long, narrow pond of alkali green water, which nourished several thickets of bristling saltbush. Cugel leaned forward and focused his gaze upon the bushes, but their spindly stalks provided no cover. What of the lake itself? It seemed too shallow to hide any consequential danger. Cugel straightened himself with a sense of work well done. He glanced up to the ridge to discover that the windstick devils had reappeared in greater number than before, craning high to peer down at the caravan, then ducking quickly from view. Cugel pulled at Shilko's leg. The windstick devils have returned in force. Shilko backed from the tent and heaved himself erect. What is it this time? Cugel indicated the ridge. Look for yourself. The windstick devils, however, had completed their survey, and Shilko saw nothing. This time he merely shrugged wearily and prepared to resume his rest. Cugel, however, went to the gunwale and shouted down to Varmous windstick devils by the dozen. They gather on the other side of the ridge. Varmous halted his carriage. Windstick devils? Where is Shilko? I am here naturally, keeping a keen lookout. What of these windstick devils? Have you noticed them? In all candor and with due respect to Cugel, I must say that I have not seen them. Varmous chose his words carefully. Cugel, I am obliged to you for your alert warning, but this time I think that we will go forward. Shilko, continue the good work. The caravan proceeded along the road. Shilko yawned and prepared to resume his rest. Wait, cried Cugel in frustration. Notice that gap in the hills yonder? If the devils choose to follow us, they must jump across the gap, and you will be sure to see them. Shilko grudgingly resigned himself to the wait. These fancies, Cugel, are a most unhealthy sign. Consider to what sorry extremes they may lead. For your own sake you must curb the affliction. Now, there is the gap. We are coming abreast. Look with great attention and tell me when you see devils jumping across. The caravan drew abreast of the gap. In a flurry of great smoky shapes, the windstick devils leapt over the hill and down upon the caravan. Now, said Cugel. For a frozen instant, Shilko stood with a trembling jaw. Then he bawled down to Varmous, Beware! Windstick devils are on the attack! Varmous failed to hear properly and looked up toward the boat. He discovered a blur of hurtling dark shapes, but now defense was impossible. The devils tramped back and forth among the wagons while teamsters and passengers fled into the chilly waters of the pond. The devils wreaked all convenient damage upon the caravan, overturning wagons and carriages, kicking off wheels, scattering stores and baggage. Next they turned their attention to the Avventura, but Cugel caused the rope to lengthen and the vessel floated high. The devils jumped up and clawed at the hull, but fell short by 50 feet. Giving up the attack, they seized all the farlocks, tucking them one under each arm, then jumped over the hill and were gone. Cugel lowered the boat, while teamsters and passengers emerged from the pond. Varmous had been trapped under his overturned carriage and all hands were required to extricate him. With difficulty, Varmous raised himself to stand upon his bruised legs. He surveyed the damage and gave a despondent groan. This is beyond understanding. Why are we so cursed? He looked around the bedraggled company. Where are the lookouts? Cugel? Shilko? Be good enough to stand forward. Cugel and Shilko diffidently showed themselves. Shilko licked his lips and spoke earnestly. I called out the alarm. All can testify to this. Otherwise, the disaster might have been far worse. You were dilatory. The devils were already upon us. What is your explanation? Shilko looked all around the sky. It may sound strange, but Cugel wanted to wait until the devils jumped across the gap. Varmous turned to Cugel. I am absolutely bewildered. Why would you not warn us of the danger? I did so, if you will recall. When I first saw the devils, I considered calling the alarm, but this is most confusing, said Varmous. You saw the devils previous to the occasion of your warning? Certainly, but Varmous, grimacing in pain, held up his hand. I have heard enough. Cugel, your conduct has been unwise, to say the very least. That is not a sound judgment, cried Cugel hotly. Varmous made a weary gesture. Is it not immaterial? The caravan is destroyed. We are left helpless out on the Aldish waste. In another month the wind will blow sand over our bones. Cugel looked down to his boots. They were scuffed and dull, but magic might still reside in them. He pitched his voice in tones of dignity. The caravan can still proceed, through the courtesy of the excoriated and savagely denounced Cugel. Varmous spoke sharply. Please convey your exact meaning. It is possible that magic still remains in my boots. Make ready your wagons and carriages. I will raise them into the air, and we will continue as before. Varmous at once became energetic. He instructed his teamsters, who brought as much order as possible to their wagons and carriages. Ropes were tied to each, and the passengers took their places. Cugel, walking from vehicle to vehicle, kicked to apply that levitational force still clinging to his boots. The wagons and carriages drifted into the air. The teamsters took the ropes and waited for the signal. Varmous, whose bruised muscles and sprained joints prevented him from walking, elected to ride aboard the Avventura. Cugel started to follow, but Varmous stopped him. We need only a single lookout, a man of proved judgment, who will be Shilko. If I were not crippled, I would gladly tow the ship. But that duty must now devolve upon you. Take up the rope, Cugel, and lead the caravan along the road at your best speed. Recognizing the futility of protest, Cugel seized the rope and marched off down the road, towing the Avventura behind him. At sunset, the wagons and carriages were brought down and camp was made for the night. Slavoy, the chief teamster, under the supervision of Varmous, set out the guard. Fence. A fire was built, and wine was served to defeat the gloom of the company. Varmous made a terse address. We have suffered a serious setback and much damage has been done. Still, it serves no purpose to point the finger of blame. I have made calculations and taken advice from Dr. Lalanque, and I believe that 4 days of travel will bring us to Kaspara Vitatus, where repairs can be made. Until then, I hope that no one suffers undue inconvenience. A final remark. The events of today are now in the past, but 2 mysteries still oppress us. The disappearances of Ivanello and Ermolda. Until these matters are clarified, all must be careful. Wander nowhere alone. At any suspicious circumstance, be sure to notify me. The evening meal was served and a mood of almost frenetic gaiety overcame the company. Sush, Ska's generalized, performed a set of bounding, hopping exercises, and presently it became clear that they were mimicking the windstick devils. Clissom became elevated by wine. Is it not wonderful? He cried out. This excellent vintage has stimulated all 3 segments of my mind, so that while one observes this fire and the Aldish waste beyond, another composes exquisitely beautiful odes, while the third weaves festoons of imaginary flowers to cover the nudity of passing nymphs, also imaginary. The ecclesiarch Golfrabi listened to Clissom with disapproval and put 4 drops of aspergantium rather than the customary 3 into his own wine. Is it necessary to go to such inordinate extremes? Clissom raised a wavering finger. For the freshest flowers and the most supple nymphs, the answer is emphatically yes. Golfrabi spoke severely. At the Collegium we feel the contemplation of even a few infinities is stimulation enough, at least for persons of taste and culture. He turned away to continue a conversation with Peruquil. Clissom mischievously sprinkled the back of Golfrabi's gown with a pervasively odorous sachet, which caused the austere ecclesiarch great perplexity to the end of the evening. With the dying of the embers, the mood of the company again became subdued, and only reluctantly did they go off to their beds. Aboard the Avventura, Varmous and Shilko now occupied the berths which had been those of Ivanello and Ermolda, while Cugel kept to his tent on the bow. The night was quiet. Cugel, for all his fatigue, was unable to sleep. Midnight was marked by a muffled chime of the ship's clock. Cugel dozed. An unknown period of time went by. A small sound aroused Cugel to full alertness. For a moment he lay staring up into the dark. Then, groping for his sword, he crawled to the opening of the tent. The masthead light cast a pale illumination along the deck. Cugel saw nothing unusual. No sound could be heard. What had aroused him? For 10 minutes, Cugel crouched by the opening, then slowly returned to his cushion. Cugel lay awake. The faintest of sounds reached his ears, a click, a creak, a scrape. Cugel again crawled to the opening of his tent. The masthead lamp cast as many shadows as puddles of light. One of the shadows moved and sidled out across the deck. It seemed to carry a parcel. Cugel watched with an eerie prickling at the back of his neck. The shadow jerked to the rail and with the most peculiar motion tossed its burden over the side. Cugel groped back into his tent for his sword, then crawled out upon the foredeck. He heard a scrape. The shadow had merged with other shadows and could no longer be seen. Cugel crouched in the dark and presently thought to hear a faint squealing sound abruptly stilled. The sound was not repeated. After a time, Cugel hunched back into the tent and there kept vigil, cramped and cold. With eyes open, he slept. A maroon beam from the rising sun glinted into his open eyes, startling him into full awareness. With groans for twinges and aches, Cugel hauled himself erect. He donned his cloak and hat, buckled the sword around his waist, and limped down to the main deck. Varmous was only just emerging from his berth when Cugel peered in through the doorway. "What do you want?" growled Varmous. "Am I not even allowed time to adjust my garments?" Cugel said, "Last night I saw sights and I heard sounds. I fear that we may discover another disappearance." Varmous uttered a groan and a curse. "Who?" "I do not know." Varmous pulled on his boots. "What did you see and what did you hear?" "I saw a shadow. It threw a parcel into the thicket. I heard a clicking sound and then the scrape of a door. Later I heard a cry." Varmous donned his rough cape, then pulled the flat, broad-brimmed hat down over his golden curls. He limped out on deck. "I suppose that first of all we should count noses." "All in good time," said Cugel. "First let us look into the parcel, which may tell us much or nothing, as you wish." The two descended to the ground. "Now then, where is the thicket?" "Over here, behind the hull. If I had not been witness, we would never have known." They circled the ship and Cugel clambered into the black fronds of the thicket. Almost at once he discovered the parcel and gingerly pulled it out into the open. The two stood looking down at the object, which was wrapped in soft blue fabric. Cugel touched it with his toe. "Do you recognize the stuff?" "Yes. It is the cloak favored by Perilous." They looked down at the parcel in silence. Cugel said, "We now can guess the identity of the missing person." Varmous grunted. "Open the parcel." "You may do so if you like," said Cugel. "Come now, Cugel," protested Varmous. "You know that my legs cause me pain when I stoop." Cugel grimaced. Crouching, he twitched at the binding. The folds of the cloak fell back to reveal two bundles of human bones, cleverly interlocked to occupy a minimum volume. "Amazing," whispered Varmous. "Here is either magic or sheer paradox. How else can skull and pelvis be interlocked in such intricate fashion?" Cugel was somewhat more critical. "The arrangement is not altogether elegant. Notice Ivanello's skull is nested into Ermald's pelvis, similarly with Ermald's skull and Ivanello's pelvis. Ivanello especially would be annoyed by the carelessness." Varmous muttered, "Now we know the worst. We must take action." With one accord, the two looked up to the hull of the ship. At the porthole giving into the aft cabin, there was movement as the hanging was drawn aside, and for an instant a luminous eye looked down at them. Then the curtain dropped, and all was as before. Varmous and Cugel returned around the ship. Varmous spoke in a heavy voice. "You, as master of the Avventura, will wish to lead the decisive action. I will of course cooperate in every respect." Cugel pondered. "First we must remove the passengers from the snip. Then you must bring up a squad of armed men and lead them to the door, where you will issue an ultimatum. I will stand steadfast nearby," and Varmous held up his hand. "By reason of sore legs, I cannot issue such an ultimatum." "Well then, what do you suggest?" Varmous considered a moment or two, then proposed a plan which required, in essence, that Cugel, using the full authority of his rank, should advance upon the door and, if need be, force an entrance, a plan which Cugel rejected for technical reasons. At last the two formulated a program which both considered feasible. Cugel went to order the ship's passengers to the ground. As he had expected, Perilous was not among their number. Varmous assembled and instructed his crew. Shilko, armed with a sword, was posted as guard before the door, while Cugel mounted to the afterdeck. A pair of trained carpenters climbed upon tables and boarded over the portholes, while others nailed planks across the door, barring egress. From the lake, buckets of water were transferred along a human chain and passed up to the afterdeck, where the water was poured into the cabin through a vent. From within the cabin, an angry silence prevailed. Then presently, as water continued to pour in through the vent, a soft hissing and clicking began to be heard, and then a furious whisper, "I declare a nuisance. Let the water abate." Shilko, before mounting guard, had stepped into the galley for a few swallows of wine to warm his blood. Posturing and waving his sword before the door, he cried out, "Black hag, your time has come. You shall drown like a rat in a sack." For a period the sounds within were stilled, and nothing could be heard but the splash of water into water. Then once again a hissing and clicking, at an ominous pitch, and a set of rasping vocables. Shilko, emboldened both by wine and the planks across the door, called out, "Odorous witch, drown more quietly, or I, Shilko, will cut out both your tongues." He flourished his sword and cut a caper, and all the while the buckets were busy. From within the cabin something pressed at the door, but the planks held secure. Again from within came a heavy thrust. The planks groaned and water spurted through cracks. Then a third impact and the planks burst apart. Foul-smelling water washed out upon the deck. Behind came Nicephor. Clothed in neither gown, hat, nor veil, she stood revealed as a burly black creature of hybrid character, half Sime and half Basil, with a bristle of black fur between the eyes. From a rusty black thorax depended the segmented abdomen of a wasp. Down the back hung sheaths of black chitin-like wing cases. 4 thin black arms ended in long, thin human hands. Thin shanks of black chitin and peculiar, padded feet supported the thorax with the abdomen hanging between. The creature took a step forward. Shilko emitted a strangled yell and, stumbling backwards, fell to the deck. The creature jumped forward to stand on his arms, then, squatting, drove its sting into his chest. Shilko uttered a shrill cry, rolled clear, turned several frantic somersaults, fell to the ground, bounded blindly to the lake and thrashed here and there in the water, and at last became still. Almost at once the corpse began to bloat. Aboard the Avventura, the creature named Nicephor turned and started to re-enter the cabin, as if satisfied that it had rebuffed its enemies. Cugel, on the afterdeck, slashed down with his sword, and the blade, trailing 1,000 sparkling motes, cut through Nicephor's left eye and into the thorax. Nicephor whistled in pain and surprise, and stood back the better to identify its assailant. It croaked, "Ah, Cugel, you have hurt me, you shall die by a stench." With a great pounding flutter of wing cases, Nicephor sprang up to the afterdeck. In a panic, Cugel retreated behind the binnacle. Nicephor advanced, the segmented abdomen squirming up and forward between the thin black legs, revealing the long yellow sting. Cugel picked up one of the empty buckets and flung it into Nicepher's face. Then, while Nicephor fought away the bucket, Cugel jumped forward and with a great sweep, cut the vincus, so as to separate abdomen from thorax. The abdomen, falling to the deck, writhed and worked, and presently rolled down the companionway to the deck. Nicephor ignored the mutilation and came forward, dripping a thick yellow liquid from its vincus. It lurched toward the binnacle and thrust out its long black arms. Cugel backed away, hacking at the arms. Nicephor shrieked and, lunging forward, swept the sword from Cugel's grasp. Nicephor stepped forward with clicking wing cases and, seizing Cugel, drew him close. "Now, Cugel, you will learn the meaning of fetter." Cugel bent his head and thrust spatterlight against Nicepher's thorax. When Varmous, sword in hand, climbed the companionway, he found Cugel leaning limp-legged against the taffrail. Varmous looked around the afterdeck. "Where is Nicephor?" "Nicephor is gone." 4 days later, the caravan came down from the hills to the shores of Lake Zaol. Across the glimmering water, 8 white towers, half hidden in pink haze, marked the site of Kaspara Vitatus, sometimes known as the City of Monuments. The caravan circled the lake and approached the city by the Avenue of the Dynasties. After passing under 100 or more of the famous monuments, the caravan arrived at the center of town. Varmous led the way to his usual resort, the Kanba Inn, and the weary travelers prepared to refresh themselves. While ordering the cabin occupied by Nicephor, Cugel had come upon a leather sack containing over 100 terces, which he took into his private possession. Varmous, however, insisted upon helping Cugel explore the effects of Ivanello, Ermalda, and Peruquil. They discovered another 300 terces, which they shared in equal parts. Varmous took possession of Ivanello's wardrobe, while Cugel was allowed to keep the milk opal ear bangle, which he had coveted from the first. Cugel also offered Varmous full title to the Avventura for 500 terces. The price is an absolute bargain. Where else will you find a sound vessel fully outfitted and well found for such a price? Varmous only chuckled. If you offer to provide me a goiter of superlative size for 10 terces, would I buy, bargain or not? We have here a distinctly different proposition, Cugel pointed out. Bah, the magic is failing. Every day the ship sags more heavily to the ground. In the middle of the wilderness, what good is a ship which will neither float in the air nor sail in the sand? In a foolhardy spirit, I will offer you 100 terces, no more. Absurd, scoffed Cugel, and there the matter rested. Varmous went out to see to the repair of his wagons and discovered a pair of lake fishermen inspecting the Avventura with interest. In due course, Varmous succeeded in obtaining a firm offer for the vessel, to the amount of 625 terces. Cugel, meanwhile, drank beer at the Conba Inn. As he sat musing, into the common room strode a band of 7 men, with harsh features and rough voices. Cugel looked twice at the leader, then a third time, and finally recognized Captain Wiskitch, one-time owner of the Avventura. Captain Wiskitch evidently had picked up the trail of the vessel, and had come in hot pursuit to recover his property. Cugel quietly departed the common room, and went in search of Varmous, who, as it happened, was also on the lookout for Cugel. They met in front of the inn. Varmous wanted to drink beer in the common room, but Cugel led him across the avenue to a bench from which they could watch the sun set into Lake Zale. Presently the Avventura was mentioned, and with surprising ease agreement was reached. Varmous paid over 250 terces for full title to the vessel. The two parted on the best of terms. Varmous went off to locate the fishermen, while Cugel, disguising himself in a hooded cloak and a false beard, took lodging at the Green Star Inn, using the identity Tixanor, a purveyor of antique grave markers. During the evening a great tumult was heard, first from the neighborhood of the docks and then at the Conba Inn, and persons coming into the Green Star common room identified the rioters as a group of local fishermen in conflict with a band of newly arrived travelers, with the eventual involvement of Varmous and his teamsters. Order was restored at last. Not long after, 2 men looked into the Green Star common room. One called out in a rough voice, "Is there anyone here named Cugel?" The other spoke with more restraint, "Cugel is urgently needed. If he is here, let him step forward." When no one responded, the 2 men departed and Cugel retired to his room. In the morning, Cugel went to a nearby hostelry, where he purchased a steed for his journey south. The ostler's boy then conducted him to a shop where Cugel bought a new pouch, a pair of saddlebags into which he packed necessities for his journey. His hat had become shabby and also carried a stench where it had pressed against Nicephor. Cugel removed Spatterlight, wrapped it in heavy cloth and tucked it into his new pouch. He bought a short-billed cap of dark green velvet which, while far from ostentatious, pleased Cugel with its air of restrained elegance. Cugel paid his account from the terces in the leather sack from Nicephor's cabin. It also exhaled a stench. Cugel started to buy a new sack but was dissuaded by the ostler's boy. "Why waste your terces? I have a sack much like this one which you may have free of charge." "That is generous of you," said Cugel, and the two returned to the hostelry, where Cugel transferred his terces into the new sack. The steed was brought forth. Cugel mounted and the boy adjusted the saddlebags in place. At this moment 2 men of harsh appearance entered the hostelry and approached with quick strides. "Is your name Cugel?" "Definitely not," declared Cugel. "By no means. I am Tichenor. What do you want with this Cugel? None of your affair. Come along with us, you have an unconvincing manner." "I have no time for pranks," said Cugel. "Boy, you may hand me up my leather sack." The boy obeyed and Cugel secured the sack to his saddle. He started to ride away, but the men interfered. "You must come with us." "Impossible," said Cugel. "I am on my way to Torquil." He kicked one in the nose and the other in the belly, and rode at speed down the avenue of the dynasties, and so departed Kaspara Vitatus. After a period he halted, to learn what pursuit, if any, had been offered. An unpleasant odor reached his nostrils, emanating from the leather sack. To his perplexity, it proved to be the same sack he had taken from Nicephor's cabin. Cugel anxiously looked within, to find, not terses, but small objects of corroded metal. Cugel uttered a groan of dismay and, turning his steed, started to return to Kaspara Vitatus, but now he noticed a dozen men crouched low in their saddles coming after him in hot pursuit. Cugel uttered another wild cry of fury and frustration. He cast the leather sack into the ditch, and turning his steed once more rode south at full speed.